In the pantheon of Hollywood legends, few names shine with the enduring brilliance of Tom Cruise. For over 4 decades, he has defined what it means to be a movie star, not just through his incandescent smile or death-defying stunts, but through a work ethic that has become the stuff of industry legend. The man who once told Oprah he wanted to make movies forever has delivered on that promise with an almost supernatural consistency. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like as a gesture of tribute to this extraordinary talent whose passion for cinema has never wavered, even as the industry transformed around him. But behind the megawatt smile and box office triumphs lies a story far more complex than many realize. The golden boy of American cinema, the man who once seemed to have it all, has weathered storms that would have broken lesser souls. At 62, Tom Cruise stands at a crossroads that few could have predicted, his professional acclaim at an all-time high, while his personal life remains shrouded in painful silences and costly sacrifices. At 62, Thomas Cruise Mapother IV carries the weight of an empire built on his shoulders, one impossible mission at a time. Yet for all his professional triumphs, there is a haunting emptiness that follows him, a series of fractured relationships, estrangements, and public scrutiny that has extracted a toll few can comprehend. Sources close to the actor suggest a growing isolation behind the carefully maintained facade, the price of extraordinary fame coupled with extraordinary devotion to beliefs that have both sustained and separated him. What happens when the man who conquered Hollywood finds himself unable to conquer the deepest human need for connection? What does success truly mean when victories come at such profound personal cost? The Tom Cruise we see today, still defying gravity in action sequences, still commanding 9-figure salaries, still running with the same intensity that became his cinematic signature, exists in stark contrast to the boy who once dreamed of becoming a Catholic priest. The distance between these two versions of Thomas Cruise Mapother IV reveals not just a career trajectory, but a soul's journey through triumph and tribulation. The Syracuse, New York bedroom where young Tom spent sleepless nights was nothing like the sprawling estates he would later call home. Born on July 3, 1962, to Mary Lee Pfeiffer, a special education teacher, and Thomas Cruise Mapother III, an electrical engineer, Tom's early life was marked by instability that would shape his later drive for control and excellence. The cramped quarters of their modest home became even more confining under the shadow of a father described by those who knew the family as domineering and unpredictable. "I was always afraid of being hit, afraid of not being smart enough, afraid of not being able to figure it out fast enough," Tom reportedly once confided to a childhood friend. These early admissions, rarely referenced in his later, more controlled public narrative, offer a window into the foundation of what would become his legendary intensity. By the time Tom was 12, his parents had divorced, and he, his mother, and his 3 sisters had moved 4 times across multiple states. The geographic instability was compounded by financial uncertainty, his mother working multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. For a young boy with undiagnosed dyslexia, each new school presented not just social challenges, but academic mountains that seemed insurmountable. The learning disability that would later become part of his public narrative of overcoming adversity was, in those early years, simply a source of deep shame and confusion. The small apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, where they lived for a time, became the backdrop for a pivotal moment in young Tom's development. It was there, reportedly huddled in the kitchen with his sisters as his mother worked a late shift, that he first discovered performance as both escape and connection. Staging elaborate plays for his siblings, complete with costumes cobbled together from household items, he found a power he hadn't experienced before. the ability to command attention through sheer force of commitment. The woods behind their Glen Ridge, New Jersey home became another sanctuary. Friends from this period describe a boy who would disappear for hours, creating elaborate fantasies and practicing the physical stunts that would one day become his trademark. It was as if, even then, he was rehearsing for a life where physical mastery could compensate for emotional uncertainty. Church provided another framework for understanding the world. Raised Catholic, young Tom briefly considered the priesthood, a fact that seems almost incongruous with his later life trajectory. The ritual and certainty of religious practice offered structure in a childhood marked by upheaval. Those who knew him then describe a boy desperate for boundaries and meaning, someone who threw himself completely into whatever system promised order amid chaos. The smell of fresh-cut grass on the wrestling mats became another memory anchored in this period. Despite his small stature, a point of persistent insecurity, Tom found in wrestling a meritocracy where determination could overcome physical limitations. The hours spent training, pushing his body past what seemed possible, established a template for how he would later approach his craft, with relentless, almost superhuman dedication. High school brought its own trials. By his own account, Tom attended 15 schools in 12 years. Each new classroom meant reinventing himself, learning to read the social cues quickly, adapting to survive. The chameleon-like quality that would later serve him as an actor was born of necessity. A child learning that identity could be flexible, that reinvention was possible, that one could become whatever the moment required. A knee injury during his senior year derailed his wrestling aspirations and redirected his energies toward the school play, Guys and Dolls. Those who saw him perform recall a transformation, the somewhat awkward, intense teenager suddenly commanding the stage with unexpected presence. It wasn't merely that he was good, it was that he seemed, for perhaps the first time, fully at home in his skin. The months following high school graduation revealed another pattern that would define his approach to life. When Tom Cruise committed to something, half measures were inconceivable. With his mother's reluctant blessing and $850 saved from odd jobs, he gave himself a deadline, 1 year to make inroads in New York before considering college. It was a breathtaking leap of faith for a dyslexic kid with no connections and little formal training. But even then, failure seemed not to register as a possibility in his mind. The invisibility of those early days in New York still feels like a revelation when contrasted with his later ubiquity. The young man who would become one of the most recognizable faces on the planet once walked the streets of Manhattan in complete anonymity, bussing tables at restaurants and delivering food to make rent on a shabby apartment shared with aspiring actors. Casting directors saw dozens like him every day, handsome, hungry young men with more ambition than experience. What they couldn't see was the almost pathological determination beneath the boyish smile. While contemporaries balanced auditions with active social lives, Tom reportedly maintained a schedule that left little room for anything but the pursuit of his craft. Acting classes during the day, work at night, scripts read during subway rides, and physical training squeezed into whatever hours remained. The rejection was relentless. His height, 5 feet 7 inches in an industry that typically favors taller leading men, became a constant barrier. One casting director reportedly told him bluntly, "Kid, you've got presence, but you're too short to be a leading man." Another suggested he consider character roles instead. These dismissals, which might have crushed a less resilient spirit, seemed only to harden his resolve. A bit part in Endless Love, 1981, hardly seemed the stuff of legend, a few lines, a forgettable character. The Franco Zeffirelli film starred Brooke Shields, and Tom's role was so minor that many viewers wouldn't even register his presence. Similarly, his work in Taps that same year, while slightly more substantial, gave little indication of the career that would follow. He was just one of many young actors scratching for a foothold in an indifferent industry. The Los Angeles apartment he moved to after these early roles was hardly more impressive than his New York accommodation. Friends from this period describe a Spartan existence: minimal furniture, no decorations, nothing to suggest the luxury that would later surround him. Every dollar went back into the pursuit: headshots, classes, the right clothes for auditions. He was invisible in a world obsessed with spotlights, just another anonymous face in the endless cattle calls that power the Hollywood machine. "I was broke, completely broke many, many times," he once admitted in a rare, unguarded moment during a magazine interview. "But I never doubted, not once." This statement, made years later from the vantage point of success, illuminates perhaps the most essential quality that separated Tom Cruise from equally talented contemporaries: an unshakable belief that seemed to transcend normal human doubt. His preparation for auditions became the stuff of industry whispers. The young actor who would research not just the role, but the director's entire filmography, who would arrive knowing every detail of the production history, who would somehow make each casting director feel that their project was the only thing that mattered in the universe. This intensity, which would later become both his signature and occasionally a point of public caricature, was already fully formed in these lean years. And then came Risky Business, 1983. The sliding doors moment, the audition that would change everything. The story has become Hollywood legend, how director Paul Brickman saw something in the young actor that transcended conventional leading man qualities, how Tom prepared for the audition with the thoroughness of someone studying for advanced degrees, how the famous dance scene in underwear and button-down shirt, later iconic, was initially something Tom approached with uncertainty. And that's when everything changed. The moment Tom Cruise slid across the hardwood floor in his socks, lip-syncing to Bob Seger's old-time rock and roll, a star was born. More than just a memorable scene, it was a perfect distillation of what would make him a cultural phenomenon: the boy-next-door charm coupled with just enough danger to be interesting, the wholesome good looks with hints of something more complex underneath, the physical commitment that made even a simple dance feel like an event. Risky Business wasn't just a box office success, it was a cultural marker. Film critics took notice of the young actor's ability to balance comedy with surprising emotional depth. Audiences responded to his accessibility. He seemed both aspirational and approachable, a rare combination in leading men. Hollywood power brokers suddenly saw what they had missed in all those earlier rejections: star quality that transcended conventional metrics. The offers began flooding in. Roles that established actors would have coveted now being presented to the 21-year-old who, just months before, had been struggling to make rent. In an industry notorious for overnight successes that fizzled just as quickly, many expected Tom Cruise to enjoy his moment and then recede into the vast landscape of actors who once had promise. What they failed to recognize was that success hadn't changed his approach. If anything, it intensified his already formidable work ethic. His follow-up films, All the Right Moves and Legend, showed range but didn't capture the lightning of his breakthrough. It would take Tony Scott's Top Gun, 1986, to elevate him from promising young actor to global superstar. As naval aviator Pete Maverick Mitchell, Cruise didn't just play a role, he created a cultural archetype that would influence everything from military recruitment to fashion. The Ray-Ban sunglasses, the leather bomber jacket, the motorcycle, These weren't just costume elements, but extensions of a persona that seemed to perfectly capture the confident, slightly rebellious spirit of the Reagan era. Young men across America wanted to be him. Young women, and plenty of men, wanted to be with him. The film grossed over $350 million worldwide against a $15 million budget, cementing Cruise's status as not just a star, but a bankable Hollywood force. What followed was a run of success that still stands as one of the most impressive in Hollywood history. The Color of Money, 1986, paired him with Paul Newman under Martin Scorsese's direction, a masterclass in how to hold your own opposite a legend. Rain Man, 1988, with Dustin Hoffman, showcased his willingness to play supporting roles if the material was right. Born on the 4th of July, 1989, earned him his first Oscar nomination and proved he was more than just a pretty face. By the time A Few Good Men, 1992, pitted him against Jack Nicholson in one of cinema's most quoted scenes, Tom Cruise had accomplished something remarkable. He had transitioned from teen heartthrob to respected actor without sacrificing commercial appeal. While contemporaries often had to choose between artistic credibility and box office success, Cruise somehow managed both simultaneously. The Sydney, Australia hotel suite where Tom Cruise celebrated his 30th birthday in 1992 represented a pinnacle few actors ever reach. He had critical respect, commercial clout, and the power to choose his projects. His marriage to Nicole Kidman, whom he had met on the set of Days of Thunder, seemed to complete the perfect picture. Hollywood's golden couple, beautiful and talented in equal measure. But here's where it gets complicated. The very qualities that propelled Tom Cruise to unprecedented success, his intensity, his complete commitment, his need for control, contained the seeds of the personal challenges that would later define his public narrative just as much as his professional triumphs. The perfectionism that made him such a valuable on-set presence could make him difficult in personal relationships. The total dedication to whatever system of belief he embraced, whether his work, his relationships, or eventually his religion, left little room for the messy compromises that sustain most human connections. The boy who had once felt powerless in an unstable childhood now wielded enormous power, but seemed unable to find the security that had eluded him in those early years. His increasing involvement with the Church of Scientology, which reportedly began around 1986 through his first wife Mimi Rogers, would become both a source of personal stability and public controversy. Friends from his early career describe a noticeable change, a new certainty in his worldview, a vocabulary of self-improvement that seemed to provide answers to questions that had long troubled him. For an actor whose childhood had been marked by learning disabilities and constant relocation, the structured teachings of Scientology offered something precious, a framework for understanding his past struggles and a path toward future growth. Those close to him during this period describe someone who had found not just a religion, but a home, a system that validated his experiences and promised continued advancement through dedicated effort, mirroring the meritocracy he had always sought in his professional life. The cost of this newfound certainty would not become apparent until years later. The beliefs that provided him such comfort would eventually create distance between him and many who had been part of his life before: family members, industry colleagues, and eventually the mother of his children. The dissolution of his marriage to Nicole Kidman in 2001 marked the beginning of a period where Tom Cruise's personal life began to overshadow his professional achievements. The couple who had seemed so perfectly matched, who had weathered the stresses of dual acting careers and adopted 2 children together, suddenly announced their separation after 11 years. The industry that had celebrated their union now feasted on its demise, with speculation about the role Scientology might have played in the split dominating tabloid coverage. What happened behind closed doors remains largely private, as it should. But sources close to both parties suggest a gradually widening gulf. Nicole's reluctance to fully embrace Scientology reportedly creating tension in a relationship where complete alignment had once been the norm. The children, Isabella and Connor, remained with their father following the divorce, adopting his religious beliefs and reportedly becoming distant from their mother, a painful outcome that would fuel years of public sympathy for Kidman. The period following the divorce revealed a Tom Cruise the public hadn't seen before, someone whose private beliefs suddenly became very public indeed. His whirlwind romance with actress Katie Holmes, culminating in the infamous couch-jumping incident on Oprah Winfrey's show in 2005, marked a turning point in how the public perceived the once untouchable star. The controlled, careful actor who had managed his image with military precision for decades suddenly seemed impulsive, even erratic. His public statements about Scientology grew more frequent and forthright, most notably in a leaked video where his passion for the religion was on full display. His criticism of psychiatry and antidepressants during an uncomfortable interview with Matt Lauer created further distance between the actor and portions of his audience who found these views troubling. The birth of his daughter Suri in 2006 and his marriage to Holmes that same year seemed to herald a new chapter, a chance to recapture the family stability that had been his most consistent professional theme. Red carpet appearances showed a doting father and husband seemingly at peace with his new role as family man and elder statesman of Hollywood. But the fairy tale was short-lived. In 2012, Katie Holmes filed for divorce, reportedly planning the separation with the secrecy of a military operation, changing cell phones, using different lawyers, and preparing for what many believed would be a custody battle. The settlement came quickly, perhaps too quickly for those who had expected a prolonged fight, with Holmes receiving primary custody of Suri and Cruise granted visitation rights. What followed has been one of the most puzzling chapters in Tom Cruise's public life. Despite his previous reputation as a devoted father, he has reportedly had little to no contact with his daughter in the years since the divorce. The little girl, who was once a fixture in his public appearances, carried on his shoulders at high-profile events, has grown into a young woman largely outside her father's visible orbit. Those familiar with Scientology's policy of disconnection, where members may sever ties with people deemed antagonistic to the church, have speculated about whether this explains the apparent estrangement. The Church has denied that such a policy exists in the way critics describe it, and Cruise himself has never publicly addressed the nature of his relationship with his youngest child. The silence itself speaks volumes about the costs of his choices. Now, if you're wondering how someone so famously devoted to family in his films could seemingly walk away from his own child, the reality is likely far more nuanced than tabloid narratives suggest. Court documents from the divorce remain sealed, and the terms of any custody or visitation agreements have never been made public. What appears to be absence may involve private arrangements that respect the child's privacy while maintaining some form of relationship away from public scrutiny. What is known with certainty is that Tom Cruise has continued to maintain close relationships with his two older children. Both Isabella and Connor Cruise have followed their father into Scientology, with Isabella reportedly taking on leadership roles within the organization. Their continued presence in his life suggests a man capable of deep parental bonds, making the apparent absence of his youngest daughter all the more striking by contrast. The professional cost of his increasingly public religious beliefs and personal controversies became evident in the mid-2000s as his box office reliability, once the most bankable in Hollywood showed signs of vulnerability. Films like Lions for Lambs and Valkyrie underperformed relative to expectations. His long-standing production deal with Paramount Pictures ended acrimoniously, with studio head Sumner Redstone citing Cruise's conduct as the reason for the separation. For perhaps the first time since those early rejection-filled days in New York, Tom Cruise faced the possibility that his star might be fading. Industry insiders began to whisper that his personal choices had finally caught up with his professional prospects, that the audience's ability to separate the artist from their beliefs had reached its limit. What happened next revealed perhaps the most essential truth about Thomas Cruise Mapother IV. Never, under any circumstances, count him out. Rather than retreat from public view or attempt to rehabilitate his image through carefully managed interviews, Cruise doubled down on the one thing that had never failed him: his willingness to push himself beyond normal human limitations for his craft. If audiences were struggling to connect with him as a person, he would give them something undeniable in his performances, particularly in the Mission Impossible franchise that had become his most reliable commercial vehicle. The image of Tom Cruise hanging from the Burj Khalifa in Dubai for Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol 2011, the world's tallest building, became a powerful metaphor for his career at that juncture. While other actors his age were transitioning to less physically demanding roles, Cruise was literally scaling new heights, performing stunts that terrified professional daredevils. The message was clear. Whatever you might think of his personal life, his commitment to delivering unprecedented spectacle remained absolute. The strategy worked. Ghost Protocol grossed nearly $700 million worldwide, re-establishing Cruise as a global box office force. Subsequent entries in the franchise have continued this upward trajectory, with Mission Impossible Fallout 2018 earning some of the best reviews of his career, along with massive commercial success. The 2022 release of Top Gun Maverick, a sequel arriving 36 years after the original, represented perhaps the most triumphant professional moment of Cruise's later career. The film grossed nearly $1.5 billion worldwide and earned critical acclaim that extended beyond the typical action genre appreciation. At 60, when most actors are finding themselves increasingly marginalized in youth-obsessed Hollywood, Tom Cruise had delivered the biggest hit of his career. Throughout these professional resurgences, Cruise has maintained close friendships with a small circle of trusted colleagues: director Christopher McQuarrie, producing partner Paula Wagner, and fellow Scientologists like Elizabeth Moss and John Travolta among them. These relationships provide glimpses of the loyalty and generosity that those who work with him consistently describe. The Tom Cruise who remembers crew members' names from films decades earlier, who sends his famous white chocolate coconut bundt cake to friends and colleagues during the holidays, who has been known to spend hours signing autographs for fans long after other celebrities would have retreated to their trailers. His romantic life since his divorce from Katie Holmes has remained largely private, a notable shift from the very public nature of his previous relationships. While there have been occasional rumors linking him to various actresses and industry figures, nothing has approached the media frenzy that surrounded his marriages. Whether this represents a strategic choice to keep his personal life out of the spotlight, or simply a man who has grown more cautious about intimate connections, remains known only to Cruise himself. At 62, Tom Cruise stands at a peculiar crossroads. Professionally, he enjoys a level of success and respect that would have seemed improbable during the troubled mid-2000s period. His work ethic remains legendary: the first to arrive, the last to leave, always knowing everyone's lines as well as his own. His physical condition defies his age, allowing him to continue performing stunts that actors decades younger would hesitate to attempt. His creative control over his projects has never been greater, with studios essentially ceding to his vision based on his proven commercial instincts. Yet, for all this professional triumph, the private Thomas Cruise Mapother, the fourth, remains an enigma, even perhaps to himself. The distance between his on-screen explorations of family, connection, and redemption and certain aspects of his off-screen reality creates a dissonance that even his most ardent fans struggle to reconcile. The man who has played so many characters seeking to repair broken family bonds appears to have unresolved fractures in his own family story. Recent public appearances show a man who seems both ageless and somehow isolated, surrounded by adoring fans and industry respect, yet often alone at events where others bring partners or family members. His homes, multiple properties across the country and internationally, are reportedly immaculate and impressive, yet friends who have visited describe them as feeling more like luxury hotels than lived-in spaces. The control that has served him so well professionally appears to extend to his personal environments, where spontaneity and messiness, the natural byproducts of intimate family life, are notably absent. Will the man who has defied physical limitations and industry expectations his entire career find a way to bridge the most painful disconnections in his personal life before it's too late? Can the intensity that has driven him to unprecedented professional heights be channeled toward healing the wounds that, by all accounts, continue to trouble him despite his outward success? These questions hover over the Tom Cruise narrative at 62, lending poignancy to his continued professional triumphs. What happens when the missions are complete, when the impossible has been accomplished repeatedly, when the need for speed has finally been satisfied? What remains for the man who has achieved everything professionally while reportedly sacrificing so much personally? As he moves into his seventh decade, these questions take on new urgency, not just for Cruise himself, but for a public that has followed his journey for over 40 years. For now, he continues to run, literally and figuratively, with the same intensity that has defined him since those early days in Syracuse. The boy who once felt powerless now commands billion-dollar productions. The teenager who struggled to read now shapes global entertainment narratives. The young man who was told he was too short to be a leading man has outlasted nearly all of his contemporaries in Hollywood's most demanding heroic roles. Yet, even as we celebrate these remarkable achievements, there remains something deeply moving about the costs they have exacted. The Tom Cruise who appears on our screens, saving the world with determined intensity, stands in stark contrast to reports of his relationship with his youngest child. The man whose smile once seemed to illuminate entire theaters now appears more guarded, his joy seemingly most authentic when discussing the technical details of filmmaking rather than his personal life. As we reflect on Tom Cruise at 62, perhaps what emerges most clearly is not tragedy in the conventional sense, but something more nuanced, a life of extraordinary achievement and painful compromise, of unparalleled professional control and personal choices that have led to reported estrangements, of a man who can leap from buildings without fear, but may struggle with the more mundane courage required to reconcile with those from whom he has grown distant. In the end, Tom Cruise remains what he has always been, a study in fascinating contradictions. The boy who overcame dyslexia to become one of the most successful actors in history. The control-focused perfectionist who has built a career on appearing to risk everything. The family man of his films who reportedly rarely sees his youngest child. The aging star who refuses to age. The intensely private figure who has lived his entire adult life in the public eye. Whatever comes next for Thomas Cruise Mapother IV, his legacy as an entertainer is secure. Few actors in the history of cinema have maintained such consistent commercial appeal across multiple decades. Fewer still have demonstrated his willingness to physically commit to his roles well into what would be retirement age for most of his peers. His place in the Hollywood pantheon is assured, his contributions to action filmmaking in particular having redefined what audiences expect from the genre. But if there is a hope that many of his longtime fans share, it is that the man who has accomplished so much professionally might find a way to reconcile the divisions in his personal life, that the boy from Syracuse who has spent a lifetime seeking control, certainty, and success might discover that the most meaningful victories sometimes require letting go rather than holding on more tightly. If you've followed Tom Cruise's extraordinary journey through the decades, take a moment to like this video in appreciation of an actor whose commitment to his craft has never wavered, even as his personal path has taken unexpected turns. His story reminds us that even those who seem to have everything continue to search for what matters most, and that behind the most brilliant public success can lie private struggles that remind us of our shared humanity. Whatever your feelings about Tom Cruise, his resilience, determination, and sheer force of will have created a body of work that will entertain generations to come. A legacy that, for all the complications of the man behind it, stands as a testament to the power of relentless belief in one's own potential.